Hello and welcome. You are listening to the Gay with God podcast, a safe place for us to share our stories and support one another. How long did we know? What challenges did we face? Did we lose our faith? When did we find our way back home? Or are we still searching? The stories you hear on this podcast will melt your heart and strengthen your belief that in God, all things are possible, and you can be authentically gay with the God of your understanding. I am your host, Midge Noble, and I am very honored that you are here. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Gay with God podcast. I have another great guest for you this week, and her name is Reverend Hillary Taylor. She is an ordained elder in the United Methodist Church with orders in the Mountain Sky Conference, which covers Colorado, Montana, and Wyoming. A graduate from Furman University and Candler School of Theology, presently serves as the Interim Executive Director for South Carolinians for Alternatives to the Death Penalty, SCADP. When she is not thinking about restorative justice, conflict transformation, and fresh expressions of ministry for the local church, she loves running with her dog Lola, watching Netflix with her cat Connor, and experiencing the outdoors any way she can. For more information about Hillary's work, go to www.scadp.org, and I'll have that on the show page for you guys later this afternoon. So, everybody, I'm excited to say that we have Reverend Hillary in the house, and we're so happy that you're here. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Midge. It's good to be with you.
Oh, you are welcome. So you and I met at the Wild Goose Festival this past year. And if anyone has not ever been to the Wild Goose Festival, you've got to look that up. Just look up Wild Goose Festival and you will find it. And it's such an amazing time. Understand that it's hot. It's in July for some reason where I don't understand. But even though I hate to be hot and I don't like hot weather, I go now every time because I just love the community and I love meeting people like Reverend Hillary. And I never would have met you ever had we not seen each other at the Wild Goose Festival. So anyway, please look that up. That's just a side note. But I want to get into the show for today. Tell us your story.
Yeah, so it's a fun one. So I'm from South Carolina. I'm from the town of Columbia, which is the capital. And I grew up, like a lot of people, with a pretty typical family. My parents, did get a divorce when I was about 6 or 7. So that is also a pretty common story for people about my age. But yeah, and kind of around the age of 5 or 6 is when I realized that, I don't like boys like I'm supposed to. And this is actually the first time I've actually ever sort of told this story on a podcast. So thank you, Midge, for being a place to amplify those voices.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah. So I had a friend who had some older sisters and, shared with her that I had a crush on this girl in my class. And my friend said, "Oh, well, that means you're gay." And, I'm the oldest in my family. And I said, "Well, what does that mean?" And she said, "Oh, it means you like girls." And so, was getting some real, like information from a peer who knew more than me because I didn't have any kind of access to that stuff. Or to those conversations. Those just weren't conversations in my house. And was sort of like, okay, yeah, that makes sense. And learned very quickly that was not really something that was good to be, was sort of frowned upon. Gay did not mean that you like girls. It means happy, right? So those are sort of the things that I internalized and, then kind of kept a lot of that part of myself kind of buried, but that's always kind of on the surface whenever you try to not have something come up, right?
Right.
So life continues, and as I grow older, and sort of in the midst of my parents splitting up, there begins to be some pretty significant kinds of family traumas that surface. My mom was not in a healthy place in that part of her life in that moment. And I ended up going to live with my dad and my stepmom after a lot of difficult sorts of family dynamics with my mom, and trying to wrestle, after lots of interventions from her family as well. So I don't really talk about this on a public platform necessarily. Usually have to be a little bit kind of evasive on the details. I don't have all the permissions to share all the different.
Absolutely.
But suffice to say, there was family trauma, there was relational rift, and I ended up going needing to move in with my dad and my stepmom. And so my stepmom is an incredible person who really rose to the occasion of making sure that my sisters and I were cared for and loved. Was also somebody who really is a deep person of faith, and kind of brought that into our family dynamic where it didn't really exist before. My stepmom is a Methodist person, and she grew up at Shandon United Methodist Church in Columbia, South Carolina. And when she and my dad started dating after my parents got divorced, she said, you know what, if you're going to date me, and she also was coming out of her own divorce as well. She and my dad were divorcing their partners around the same time they were not connected sort of before their divorces, but the bonds of trauma, right?
That's right.
They became introduced and how they got to know each other, and then began to feel attracted to one another. And my stepmom said, listen here, bud, if you're going to be dating me, then you're going to go to church with me. And you're going to bring your daughters with me when they come to be with you every other weekend, because I want this to be the place where our family has roots. And then when my dad got custody of my sisters and I, we did continue to go to church, and the church really became this place where my family could just simply come and exist. And people could just hold space with us, and they wouldn't try to pry into our pain. They simply just sort of held us, and they said, we love you, and God loves you, and we're going to be here until you can internalize that for yourself.
Wow.
And that's not something that happens in every church, unfortunately. I wish it did. And so I'm extremely grateful for my church, which has had a history of being a safe place for people and for children, especially who have different family circumstances. So I threw myself into the youth group. I became a small group Bible study leader for, I think, 5 years or so. I was involved in every mission project, and mission projects became a super important part for me and my life, because it was a way where I could repair my own sense of self, even as I was helping people rebuild their sense of home and their sense of safety. And that was a really profound and beautiful thing for me. In the South Carolina Methodist Conference, there exists this really lovely kind of summer mission project system called Salkehatchie Summer Service. It's based off of the Appalachian Service Project. And so it's these different week-long mission camps that happen all throughout the summer in different places across the state. And each place has kind of its own culture, depending on which people come every summer. And some people come some summers and some people don't. And depending on the houses. And it's this really lovely experiment in short-term missions and also short-term community building, which really saved my life in a lot of ways.
Wow.
Because I still wasn't in a place to really wrestle with my own sexual orientation, and began to bleed in other ways, right? Began to feel a sense of not really connecting and not feeling like I was, maybe all the way of who I exactly was. And, also had to switch schools a little bit whenever I did switch households. So that aided in a sense of isolation and probably stymied some of my own explorations of personal identity and who I was. And but continue to be grateful for the church because it really saved my life. And it really provided a place for me to land, especially as I dealt with different levels of depression, especially as I dealt with feeling extremely isolated and lonely. And where I didn't have a lot of peer kind of friendships because I was a parentified child in a lot of ways. The church was full of people who took me seriously and were able to give me resources for the deep theological questions I had as a young adolescent, right? The questions of why do bad things happen to people who've done nothing wrong? And why is there evil? And is God actually present there for me? And what is the role of the church and people, and how do we share and engage in mission and ministry responsibly, and how do we love people genuinely who are different from us, and how do we pay attention to evil and injustice and oppression? And I became really concerned about injustices a lot because of what I saw in mission and ministry. So I go to college and all of those things deepen, and I become very involved in lots of different things. I become involved in the Methodist Campus Ministry Group. There is a chaplains department that has a pre-ministry scholarship program. I'm able to intern with different nonprofits every year and also the chaplain's office. So I helped create an interfaith campus ministry group, which still exists to this day. So that's pretty exciting. Years later, yay!
Yay!
I become very involved in different justice things. I start studying psychology and become a poverty studies minor, and just begin this intersectional kind of study of how the environment affects our personalities and how our personalities engage with the world, and how religion and spirituality and faith play into all of that. Amidst all of that, I study abroad in Southern Africa for 9 weeks. This was my junior year. And that's when a lot of my own kind of deconstruction really happens. I felt a call to ministry at the age of 13 because of my intense and profound participation in ministry and mission with my home church. And I go and I study in South Africa and Namibia and Botswana on this traveling seminar with professors who are incredible, and they show me the history of South Africa and apartheid, right? Which mirrors so much of the racial injustices here in the United States. And I learn about neoliberalism and the ways that capitalism has really not just stymied the economic growth of Southern Africa, but the ways that it continues to keep it underdeveloped. I learned about human development and poverty, especially for children. And I learn about medical sociology and global health inequalities and HIV and tuberculosis and malaria and the different government programs and sort of, global programs that are supposed to help with these things that actually have exacerbated other issues and problems, and the ways that different cultures and governments have tried to solve each other's problems over the years, and have also contributed to creating new ones because they're not attentive to all of the injustices that could be created. And I saw that the church aided in the process of colonizing so many places in the world, especially Southern Africa, where I was studying. And I was really upset by that. And it kind of threw a wrench into my plans for mission and ministry, because how I sort of wondered, how can I be a part of an organization that has created so much injustice in the world? So I spent a lot of time trying to wrestle with that my senior year of college. At one point, I was talking to an alum of my college and university, and he told me, wow, yeah, it does sound like you need to take a year off. That was what I was already planning. And he said, there are lots of different service programs there's a list on this particular website. Why don't you go to that website and you'll be able to figure out which one exists. So I go to the website, and lo and behold, I see a program for young adult missionaries in the United Methodist Church. And I paused because I didn't know this program existed. And I was a pretty devout United Methodist. I should have, of all people, known that there was a program like this that existed. And it was this program that really, the description of it really combined social justice and responsible evangelism in a way that I hadn't read or seen, in a way that I was really searching for as I tried to figure out, do I actually want to be an ordained pastor in my tradition? So I applied and I got into the program. So after I graduated from college, I became a young adult missionary with the United Methodist Church. And interestingly enough, they sent me to South Africa for about a year and a half. And then they sent me to Miami for about a year and a half. It was a 3-year-long program. You would spend a year and a half serving outside of your home country and a year and a half serving inside of your home country. When I lived in South Africa, I was working at a Methodist seminary called Seth Mokotimi Methodist Seminary. It's the only Methodist seminary in Southern Africa. So it serves 6 countries, and it serves the denomination, the Methodist Church of Southern Africa. And that was a really amazing place. I encountered all sorts of people on all walks of life. It's one of the most diverse places in South Africa, especially. Arguably, maybe even Southern Africa. There were over a dozen languages spoken in the seminary, people coming as far as Mozambique. And it was just spectacular. People coming as far as Zambia as well. And I learned how to tend and befriend a lot of the pain that I was feeling as somebody who was a Christian, as somebody who is a descendant of colonizers here in the United States. My 6th great grandfather owned a plantation that actually encompassed the city of Columbia, and sold land to the city so that it could be built. Had over 240 or about 240 enslaved persons in his possession. So wrestling with my own identity in a place with people who also had profound experiences wrestling with their own identities too was really helpful. I came to know a lot of anti-apartheid activists who were white, and a lot of people who were engaged in the apartheid struggle who identified with all sorts of ethnic and racial backgrounds. And they too were also wrestling with Christianity in different ways too. A lot of people were wrestling with, how do I claim to be a Christian when this identity has really harmed my culture? What is the relationship between my culture and my faith? And witnessing a lot of those conversations and talking with other white people in South Africa as they wrestled with their own whiteness was pretty impactful for me, and allowed me to see, the church has done some really awful things. It's always done some really awful things. And also the church can truly be led by the Spirit, and it truly can be authentic in creating beloved community, and it truly can help fight injustice. One of the stories that I found most impactful was the story of Seth Mokotimi himself, the namesake of the seminary I worked for. Seth Mokotimi was a chaplain at one point to a small missions school. It was the missions school that actually educated Nelson Mandela when he was a child. And so Seth Mokotimi was an influence on Nelson Mandela. Nelson Mandela, of course, would later become a political activist and then a political enemy of the state. And then he would be incarcerated for 27 years, and then he would be released and become the first president of South Africa post-apartheid. And Seth Mokotimi, his chaplain in grade school, would go on to become the first Black president of the Methodist Church of Southern Africa, the first Black bishop of the denomination as a whole. And that was in response to a mass slaughter of people in 1963. I believe it was the Sharpeville Massacre. So that was an incredible experience. The job that I did there was helping seminary students combine what they were learning in an academic setting and bring it out into field education. So I was helping to coordinate the field education sites and connecting people with their passions for ministry, figure out what they loved, what was really draining for them, help them unpack difficult situations. And then I came back to the United States and I worked as a financial coach for a year and a half. And as a financial coach, my job was to educate people about the US credit system, help people find banking products that help them get where they wanted in terms of financial stability, help them achieve their financial goals, whether they wanted to buy a car or a house or pay off debt or have an amount saved in their savings account. That was also an incredible experience because it was a way for me to wrestle with my own US citizenship. And it introduced me to working with people who were returning citizens, people who have criminal records. One of my first consistent clients was somebody who came out of prison. His brother had shot and killed somebody, and my client was the getaway vehicle. My client didn't know that his brother was going to do this. And his brother really just kind of uprooted his life. My client was somebody who was trying to be a social worker, loved his community, was working for an after-school program, and then found his life upended by his brother's irresponsible actions and violence. And so he spent time in jail. He spent years in jail because he didn't want to testify against his brother. And eventually had a plea deal after spending, again, years in jail. And then he could finally go into prison and have more restorative programs and not be kept in a cell by himself. And then he got out on good behavior, but he still had he still had a parole officer. He still had to be intensely watched, and he had to mark out his every move 2 weeks ahead of time. And if a parole officer ever tried to visit him in a place where he said he was going to be and he wasn't, he would end up right back in jail. So my job was to help him find financial stability when working a job was so difficult because Florida at the time did not have a ban the box kind of law. He had to check every time for, whenever there was a job application that said, do you have a criminal record? And that was an automatic way for people to just throw away his application. Yeah. And so that was a really important thing that got me interested in criminal justice reform and now prison abolition work, because of all the ways that our prison system just doesn't restore people. It punishes people, and it makes it harder for them to experience restoration and transformation, either when they're incarcerated and certainly beyond being incarcerated. So all of those experiences are stories in and of themselves. And then I go to seminary. I decide after these 3 years that, yes, I do want to go to seminary. It's going to give me the tools that I want. I still feel called to be a minister. I feel called to do a lot of things outside of the local church. I want to bring those things into the local church because I think that the local church has so much to offer people who are experiencing a kind of scarcity. There's so much abundance in the church, and the church doesn't know what to do with that because the church doesn't have relationships with people who are always, it doesn't always have relationships with people in need. And when it does, it's often a very kind of tit for tat relationship. You need your light paid, we're going to give you money, but you can't contact us until a certain amount of time, and then maybe you can contact us again. It's a very sort of short thing, and it doesn't involve a lot of relationships that either make sure people are stable and secure and experience healing and wholeness, or if people can't experience that for different reasons, at least gets them into a place of stability, right? A place where their needs are met with abundance and with love and care. So I go to seminary. I do chaplaincy work in a prison. It's where I begin to learn about anti-death penalty work because I was in a prison that housed somebody who was on death row for 18 years.
Mm.
And she was actually executed when I was serving as a chaplain at that prison. I never met that particular person. Her name was Kelly Gissendanner, but I knew a lot of people who knew her. And I was really moved by her story because she was somebody who conspired to kill her husband. She didn't actually murder her husband. It was her boyfriend who did that. And she did not get a plea deal that she wanted. She got a plea deal of life without a chance of parole. Her boyfriend got a plea deal of life with a chance of parole, partially because he ratted her out.
Oh.
And yeah, no, everything was bad.
Oh.
Everything was bad. And so she took her chances and did not have adequate representation,
Mm.
and she got the death penalty.
Oh.
Now, our death penalty system is very political, and we often use it against women who society deems are bad mothers. And certainly Kelly admitted that she had a lot of trauma, and she had an addiction problem. And then in prison, she became the exception to the rule. She became somebody who was transformed. She sobered up. She became somebody who people loved and cared about. And she became a kind of counselor for people who were suicidal, who were in the prison with her. When people were suicidal, the officers would actually take the suicidal incarcerated folks, and they would place them in the cell right beside Kelly. She had a whole range to herself because she was the only woman on Georgia's death row for a long time.
Mm.
They would place the suicidal person next to Kelly's cell, and she would counsel them through the vents. And she would say just these life-giving things to them. I know people who've been counseled by her, and she would say, you would live, and God is here for you, and God loves you, and God is going to be there for you, and God wants you to live. And so she saved people's lives, right? And she also became a scholar of theology in her own right. There's a theology of a certificate of theology program that my seminary, Candler School of Theology, created for Lee Arundel Women's Prison. And through special permissions, because she had such a good record in her time being incarcerated, they allowed her to take a class. And this one graduate student gave her a book called Theology of Hope by Jürgen Moltmann. Jürgen Moltmann is one of the most kind of prolific systematic theologians in Christianity. He specializes in the concept of Christian hope. And she developed a pen pal relationship with him, which is pretty remarkable. And he actually came and he spoke at her graduation from her certificate of theology program. And she got to meet him, and he was somebody who was reconciled with her children, which was so hard. And I have actually spoken to one of her children, and her children certainly testified to try and save her life. And despite all of these good things that she did, despite a former warden saying, yes, we will advocate for your clemency, she was still executed by the state of Georgia. So that was a really profound moment in my own life. Not just a person who was not just as a person who was in seminary, but a person who thinks deeply and theologically and wrestles with violence and what to do with people who are violent. And this was kind of in the wake. This was several months after the Mother Emanuel shooting in Charleston. And so I was really wrestling with, how do I deal with somebody like Dylan? I do believe that God is love and God loves all of us, but I really don't know how to love this person. And so Kelly's testimony and her life were kind of this space where I learned that, wow, yeah, nobody's beyond redemption. And we are certainly more than the worst thing we've ever done. And we are certainly more than the worst thing that's happened to us. And just because I'm not able to be a part of somebody's story of change doesn't mean that that person can't change further down the road.
Mm-hmm.
So that has informed a lot of the work I do now.
Wow.
But also during that year of seminary, there were other big things that I was wrestling with. Can you guess what it is?
Oh, let me guess. I'm coming out.
Yes,
in seminary.
So I mean, sure, you know these stories. Everybody's a little gay in seminary, and seminary was the place where I actually, had lots of different folks who identified as LGBTQ kind of throughout college, and college was a really big space for me where I realized, okay, I'm a feminist, I want to be an ally, I care deeply about these things. And seminary was really the first place where I actually got to explore those questions for myself. Mm-hmm. And wasn't just kind of like, oh, well, I'm a part of a tradition that doesn't ordain gay people and doesn't look like Mary. So I'm going to be an ally because I can't be gay and also be a Methodist minister. That's So seminary was the first place where I was able to admit that I had crushes on women, even if I didn't identify as somebody who was always attracted to women as much as men, or other people. So seminary was the place where I began having those conversations with people who were safe. And that was around my first year of seminary finished in 2016. There was a pretty pivotal United Methodist General Conference at that point. And I took a class where I went to the 2016 General Conference for the United Methodist Church. And I saw I don't know if you've had other people on this podcast talk about the general conferences in the United Methodist Church, Midge.
Not exactly like that. I've had other Methodist guests, but not talking specifically about the general conference.
Yeah, so the thing about the Methodist Church is that it mirrors the United States of America, and the two developed alongside one another. And so you can actually see, based on United Methodist history, what the United States of America is going to wrestle with next.
Wow.
United Methodist, or what was a predecessor to the United Methodist Church, the Episcopal Methodist Church, split in the 1840s over the topic of slavery. And of course, less than 20 years later, you have the Civil War. In 2016, at the United Methodist General Conference, you could have predicted the 2016 US election based on the anger and rage that everybody had towards one another. The ways that progressives talked about conservatives, the way that money flowed between different groups and not to other groups, the ways that people talked about folks from the global South versus people from the United States and countries in the global North. And it was a mess. And it was this moment where I really felt empowered to be pro LGBTQ in a way that I felt that I had not felt before, and a way that I felt I don't care who people love or how people identify in terms of their gender or sexual orientation or whatever. Like, I'm gonna be accepting and loving and affirming. And then there's a still small voice in the back of my head as I say these things to myself. And that still small voice says, if you're planning on being that way for other people, you might want to offer that to yourself a little bit. So that was the first moment where I realized, oh, I might not be straight. And I think I'm in a place where I can admit that.
I might not be straight.
I might not be straight.
I love that.
I might not be straight. At that point, I'm 26, and that feels a little late to have those revelations. I now know it's not, but it also felt a little like, wow, a lot of other people have been having these conversations for at least 10 years, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
very new to this and I don't know what to do.
Mm-hmm.
So that summer, I began coming out to friends,
Mm.
and I began coming out to people who were very involved in a lot of the justice work that I was doing, cared a lot about prison reform and abolition work and restorative justice. I then have my first date with somebody who is, does not identify as male, was not assigned male at birth. And it is one of those moments where I realize, oh yeah, like I have always been attracted to women and people assigned female at birth and people who are broadly queer, and I don't know what to do now. So that relationship was a great summer experience and was informative, and um, I'm grateful to that relationship. And was upset and sad when it ended for lots of different reasons. Partially because there was a long distance factor to that
Uh-huh.
relationship,
Uh-huh.
but also there wasn't a sense of mutuality in
Mm.
that relationship either.
Mm.
Um, Based on a lot of it based on the distance.
Mm-hmm.
So then I entered the second year of seminary, which is just sad, right? Sad for lots of reasons, because it's kind of if you don't deconstruct completely theologically your first year, there's always something in your second year where you're just going to be bummed out about it. And mine happened to be, wow, I'm queer and I'm Methodist, and I don't know what to do with myself.
Yeah.
So I have a very busy year, but I also have a year where I realize I need to start coming out to my family. And so I want to tell you my favorite coming out story
Okay.
for myself. And it takes place with my dad. And just for your listeners to know, this is a story that involves hunting.
Oh.
I am an eclectic human. I love hunting. It's something that I've grown up with. It's part of a conservation kind of practice for me, and it also helps me pay attention to our natural world. And so it's something I do. So if this is not a story that you need, you can just forward through the next couple of minutes, and I'm sure Midge will give you some
Thank
notes
you for that
in the
warning.
podcast. Yeah, so there we are. I contain multitudes, as does everybody else. So my second year of seminary, I realized, wow, I need to tell my family. So I started coming out to my siblings, and I am very close with my father, and I decide I need to come out to my dad. So I decide to come out to him during fall break. I live in South Carolina, so it's hurricane season all the time during fall break. And there's a hurricane that's about to barrel through as I'm about to come home and talk to my dad about my sexual orientation. So I'm thinking there would be a stupid hurricane right as I'm about to have a conversation. Of course, it would reflect everything that I feel inside.
That's right. You're
So I
so home.
go, yes. So I go to my parents' home. We have a place in a rural part of South Carolina where we do our hunting and also have some family gatherings. And the power goes out in this house. So a lot of my family decides to pack up and go back to Columbia, where there is power and where the house is not flooded. And so my dad and I decide we're going to stay out in the country, and then we'll go home, but we're going to stay out in the country and we're going to go hunting. So we are waiting for about maybe an hour or so. The wind is blowing and we're sort of eating boiled peanuts, watching the wind go by as one does in South Carolina. And I turn to my dad and I say, "Hey Dad, can I have a conversation with you?" And he says, "Yeah, sure, Hillary. Yeah, what's up?" And proceed to say, "This is a serious conversation, and it needs to be confidential, and I am attracted to women, and I don't really know what this means vocationally for me." And so I continue talking a little bit more about that and the person that I had dated, who I had recently broken up with. So this was sort of another additional layer of sadness for me And the first thing out of my dad's mouth after I finished talking is, Hillary, thank you so much for telling me this.
Hmm.
Like, I, you know, I love you, and there's nothing in the world that can ever stop that, that could ever, I will always love you. But B, thank you for telling me this, because I was worried that whatever happened between your mom and I had robbed you of any ability to love anybody at all.
Oh.
And so it was this moment where I just like, I was able to kind of like set him kind of free in some
Mhm.
ways, and just like
Uh-huh.
give him peace. And of course, I'm crying my eyes out because, oh my gosh, like this is not what I expected. I didn't, I expected like a tense conversation, and this was just like loving and accepting, and
Mm.
continue to talk about what that means for me being in South Carolina and potentially ordained in the conference. And we hug it out, and he's like, do you still want to go hunting? And I said, yes, let's go hunting. And so then we get ready to go hunting, and we climb in a deer stand, and we just like, we tell jokes and we laugh, and then we see this massive 8-point deer, and boom, I get a trophy animal, and my dad is super thrilled. And I'm super thrilled because not only did I have like a great conversation with him, I also like made him really proud with my shooting skills.
It was
And
a
I'm
good
like,
daughter day. Good daughter
yes,
day.
it was a great daughter day. Like, you want to talk about intersectionality right there? Like, oh man, it was so good. Yes,
Mm.
it was like all the things I loved. And yes, and oh my gosh, it was like authenticity at its finest. Yes,
Mm. That's an
yeah,
amazing story. That
it's
is
an
an amazing
amazing
story.
story.
And even this vegan appreciated that story.
Yes, yes,
Because
absolutely.
I understand how scary that was for you, how absolutely frightening that can be. And wanting that relationship with your dad to feel that pride in you and to totally respect the person you are. That's just a beautiful story. It really is.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
So was
yeah, that's,
everyone as embracing as that, or did other people in your
you
method?
know, everybody, I have been really, really fortunate in that I have a lot of people who really love and care for me.
Yeah, you.
And so especially in my family, my first family. So my sisters have been great. All of my
Hmm.
parents have been great. If there are family members who don't like it, they haven't told me, and they, I
Hmm.
don't know if they'll ever pick a fight with me about that, and that's fine. Um, so the next part of this is that I graduate from seminary and I become more assured in kind of my identity. I presently identify as queer, and uh, and then have to become closeted, unfortunately, because I decide that I'm going to serve the local church
Mm.
in South Carolina because I love it, and because I care about it, and
Mm.
because it nurtured me, and I want it to nurture other people too. So I go into a rural community. I won't name the community because I'm not far removed from that community, and South Carolina is a small place.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But I go into the small community, and I learn the nuances of like, oh my gosh, there's queer folks everywhere in this place. And
And they're very
which is really
quiet.
nice. Yeah, they're so quiet. They're like your best neighbors, and like they care about you, and they care about the church. And and I was fortunate enough to be around a lot of really healthy people. I did not disclose who I was because it was not their job to keep my secrets.
Hmm.
Um, and and yeah, really wanted to do a lot of work with becoming like accepting and affirming in country spaces. And unfortunately, that was not possible because the
Hmm.
pandemic hit.
Mm.
And even though there was nuance in this community, you know, the pandemic was was an experience where nobody was at their best. And there was a
Hmm.
lot of fear and frustration, and fear and frustration at me because I was really stringent with COVID protocol. unlike a lot of people around me and unlike a lot
Mm-hmm.
of church leaders around me, which was really sad.
Mm-hmm.
And it was also a space where when George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor were murdered, I attempted to do some conversations around racial injustice, sometimes from the pulpit, definitely through a virtual book study
Mm-hmm.
on the cross and the lynching tree. And it was not well received. And actually, of all the things that I tried to do, I did try to have a conversation about human sexuality in 2019 with my church community members, and that did not go well. Lost some
Mm-hmm.
people because I disagreed with the 2019 General Conference in the Methodist Church, which
Mm-hmm.
adopted a traditionalist stance uh, through lots of unhappiness.
Mm-hmm.
And in COVID times, trying to address racial injustice stuff that actually created more animosity than talking about
Mm-hmm.
human sexuality, which is
Mm-hmm.
unsurprising, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Many communities in South Carolina, especially rural communities, are not honest, have a kind of revisionist history when it comes to racism and race.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and also, it's not really able to be brought up by many Black community members because of the ways that they have been silenced and continue to be silenced if
Mm-hmm.
they have differing views from their white neighbors. So, because of lots of different factors, and because I was not able to be myself in my church communities, I left
Mm-hmm.
and I left the local church, which was really hard and sad.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I spent a year this past year kind of trying to heal from it. I
Mm-hmm.
did a year of hospital chaplaincy, and through there was able to decide how I wanted to come out professionally and publicly, which is what I've done. And it's what I did back in July. So when you had met me, I had only
Mm-hmm.
been publicly out for less than a week,
Well,
which felt really good. Yeah, that's kind of my story in a nutshell. And I know we sort of like shrink the last few years into a few sentences, but yeah, I also want to leave some time for you to ask me any
yeah.
questions that you have.
Oh, well, when you said your story was something, you were right. You were right. You've been through a long journey, and let me just say thank you. Thank you for using this format, using the Gay with God podcast to, come out even in a bigger way. Um, I was just having a conversation the other day with someone about how, the whole coming out has to be a personal experience, and only when that person is ready, that pulling people out of a closet, shaming people out of the closet, is just inappropriate. And the journeys that we take are just so, even though when you said you hear all these stories, I do, but they're also uniquely personal. And it's when we decide to come out, how we decide to come out, and why we're doing that. What was the purpose of the coming out? And what I hear in your story is it's all about authenticity, and it's all about service. How
Mm-hmm.
can I serve the best? And for you to be bold and to try to get from the pulpit and in your community awareness, while you choose to go back into the closet after finally, after all of that time, being able to claim your authenticity, but you did that under service.
Mm-hmm.
And that was beautiful that you chose to do that, and beautiful that you could do that. um yeah, I was I I when I finally at 30 just realized that I was
Yeah,
gay.
yeah.
um I don't know if I could have had that much of a service heart in me to
Mm-hmm.
put someone else first at that point, but I really appreciate that part of your story. So where are you now as far as your desire to minister and to be of service? Where do you think that's going to take you now,
Mm-hmm.
um, after all of that?
Yeah, so that's a great question. Um, I have the way I'm able to keep my orders and still live in South Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
I have switched conferences. So I used to belong to the South Carolina annual conference, which is the Methodist Church in South Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
And now I belong to a conference out west. I belong to the Mountain Sky Conference.
Okay.
And that is a conference that is affirming and accepting. And I am an extension ministry through the Mountain Sky Conference.
Okay.
And they are happy to be connected to me, and they affirm all of my gifts and graces and talents, and have said, we would love to use you however you want to be used in our conference, but we also really respect the fact that you want to be in South Carolina and you feel called to be here. Because I do, right?
Mm-hmm.
South Carolina is a place that has experienced a lot of brain drain.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a place where I am on my own journey in tackling my own whiteness. It's really easy to escape your whiteness as a your white southernness in the United States if you go elsewhere, right? You can be around all sorts of other progressive people, but it's so much harder to deal with yourself. And I care a lot about that. And I'm grateful to be working with people who show me ways that, I can do better at tackling that. Because I work in social justice work is rife with a lot of well-meaning white people.
Yeah.
But especially if you're going to do work with prison and prison abolition or criminal justice reform, you need to be able to tackle a lot of your own self. And it's really easy as a queer person, right, to say that, I don't have to do that because I'm marginalized in these other ways, right?
Yes, white fragility does live in the LGBTQ community.
Yes.
So white fragility people.
Yes. And I also I want to be somebody who can be present for queer folks in South Carolina, because it is possible to create spaces of belonging here. And I'm tired of people feeling like they need to go elsewhere to find belonging. And I'm grateful for the people before me who started to create those spaces much way before I even came on the scene, right before I was born, and all those things. I do want to be connected to the church because queer people have always been connected to the church, and it's a bunch of nonsense to have this idea of, no, you can be here, but you can't have the same kinds of freedoms and privileges that are entitled to straight people. The church wouldn't exist were it not for queer people, right?
Yes. Yes.
Let's be real. And I believe that my voice has a kind of creativity to it that I don't really see in a lot of straight ministers, unfortunately. Obviously that's a broad generalization, but I am excited about my faith in a way, and my faith empowers me to do all sorts of radical things. When I was doing my ordination project, I did a gun buyback program that got national news.
Wow.
Statewide news certainly, but Pete Buttigieg retweeted an article about me.
Wow.
And I got engagement from 2 Democratic presidential nominee campaigns, like Amy Klobuchar and also Beto O'Rourke, right? These are things that happened to me.
Wow.
Because I collected 20 guns in my, sort of small town area. And that was really exciting and lovely. And I want to continue to do those kinds of radical things. And I want people to know that it is my sexual orientation and my own fear of violence against me that empowers me to want to tackle violence and empowers me to want to address suicide rates, which is the whole big reason why I did this gun buyback program, because the suicide rates in South Carolina are ridiculous. 90% of suicides are completed with a gun here. We were the only state in the United States that had an increasing suicide rate in the Southeast. But in 2019, right? It's nuts. It is completely ridiculous and completely unnecessary. We should not have the worst mental health first aid capacity in the United States. And everything about who I am informs all of the work I do. It is certainly my faith. It is certainly my sexual orientation. It is certainly the ways that I have been formed and shaped by people who also care about social holiness and personal holiness. I don't know if that answers all of your questions, but I'm friendly to churches, and I want to work with people who want to work with me, and I don't care if you're conservative or progressive, but I do care if you're loving and respectful. And there's a lot of common ground. I'm not somebody who's a purist when it comes to my politics. You know, I care about kindness. I care about love. I care about doing no harm and doing good and attending to the ordinances of God, right? Participating in means of grace, participating in God's unmerited love and the actions that remind us of God's love. Those are the things that I feel called to do. And I look forward to all the ways that I'm going to be doing that, not just in anti-death penalty work that I do now, but hopefully some chaplaincy work with LGBTQ people that I hope to do in the future, and also like whatever kind of faith-based community organizing work people want to do with me.
Well, there is absolutely no way that you're not going to be totally busy.
Yeah.
because you are passionate and you will find work, and I know that God will direct you, because I mean, you've already opened yourself wide open to service. So there's no way that you will not find the niche. And in for you, as for me, sometimes I think, you know, I've called myself a professional hummingbird, that I fly place to place and I do whatever I'm supposed to do in that place, even though I wasn't always aware of it. And with all that you've done, it's like that you have always done good work. You've done the work for good and because you're good, and you do it everywhere you go. And it took on a lot of different flavors. I mean, you know, from one thing to another, that social justice was the theme, but it was so diverse. And that's because you are open to serving no matter where you go. And it's always out of love. It's always out of that compassionate heart of wanting to bring loving kindness to the space that you're in, no matter how dark it is. And I really respect that from you. I really do.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. So as we're closing up, although I say this to a lot of people, but I especially want to say it right now, is I would talk to you forever.
No, I feel bad. I kind of took up a lot of
No. Don't you ever feel,
time with
no.
the
That
initial
is the
story.
perfect, no, that is the perfect interview, when I can have a conversation with someone and it is just that I can listen to that story. That is my jam, is to listen to your story as uninterrupted as I possibly can, because I love that your story, you know, continued to flow, and I appreciate that. So don't ever apologize for that. You have a right to speak your story. But the final question would be, as you struggled, you know, for those years to come out and to own your own identity, especially because of the church constraints, you know, how much sooner would any of us have come out if we hadn't already been condemned to hell or thought of as, you know, not right? What could somebody have said to you back in those early days of your struggle that might have made it a little bit more okay to contemplate that I could be gay and queer and, you know, still serve God and still be that minister that I'm thinking that I'm supposed to be? What could somebody have said to you that would have made it better?
Yeah, I don't know. That is something that I think about a little bit every now and again. And I don't know, in some ways I'm kind of glad I didn't come out in high school, because I had a lot of relational trauma within my family that I needed to sort. And I think that if I had realized, oh my gosh, I'm gay, on top of all of that, I think it would have been really devastating. So I don't know if that would have been helpful. It certainly, I do think that there were some relationships and friendships in my life that maybe wouldn't have been harmed if I had come out earlier. I think I put a lot of pressure on people to fix me or be present for me in ways that I didn't know that I wanted them present to be present for. So yeah, I don't know. I think certainly I just want all churches to be accepting and loving. And it was the mid 2000s, right? It was in the midst of the Episcopal Church kind of splitting and Gene Robinson making a lot of national news. And so that was the reaction to Gene Robinson informed a lot of my own theology about human sexuality at that point. Because South Carolina is where a lot of really awful kind of relational rifts happened in the Episcopal Church. Lots of different property suits. The Anglican Church is a very big presence here, and I do think a lot about how that split has informed the ways that Methodist could have chosen a different route and still chose not to. Right?
Yeah.
So that's just it. I think if my church polity had been much more accepting and affirming, it could have made space for me to be more authentic, but I'm not sure the other areas of my life would have reflected that.
Right.
I didn't go to a school where people were visibly queer or where that was welcomed either.
Right.
So there's that.
Yeah.
Again, things are different now. I'm glad things are different now.
Right.
I also know that there are lots of circumstances in my life that kind of guarded against that. And in any case, I think I'm okay with coming out as an adult, because I think there were some things that were awkward, but there were lots of things I'm really glad I didn't have to go through. Yeah. I mean, teen drama, being queer is way worse. It is so much worse. And I already had it like not great going, with like family trauma, but like, oh my gosh, like, wow, dodged a bullet. Totally dodged a bullet.
Hindsight says, glad nobody said anything prophetic to me so that I could have just been in my own space. But that's really good. That's beautiful, because sometimes we think, looking back, oh, if I'd only known all those lost years and I never knew. But, you bring up a good point that sometimes knowing too soon is not always healthy and not always helpful. So thank you for that. I'll quit beating myself up for being a late bloomer.
And I mean, I think another thing, and then I'll end, but I have certainly thought of like, oh my gosh, like all of these like teenage emotions that I now have as this young adult. This is really irritating. But also I'm so much more equipped to handle those things, right? I don't make bad decisions. I don't make rash decisions. I can create rituals to like grieve for that. And I can have therapy that I know that I need to deal with that. And I can react now with the loving relationships I do have, right? And I can pursue loving and healthy relationships too, right? Like that's a real gift of being an adult and coming out.
Oh, good. Yes. Good points. Well, thank you so much. I'm so happy that that you reached out and you decided to come on the show. Thank you so much. I really, really appreciated this conversation, and I'm happier now that I've talked with you today. That's just an amazing journey, and I'm glad that you've come out the other side, and that so many people have been touched by your life for the better.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah. And I want to thank our listeners for coming back each week, supporting and sharing and subscribing wherever you get your podcasts. And I appreciate you guys as you step up to be guests and become a part of the Gay with God community, because it's through our visibility that other people can find some value in their life and in their own journey, because they're hearing and resonating with y'all's stories. And it's like, oh, wait, that's kind of like me. And then you realize that, you do have a place in the world of authenticity. If you want to connect with Reverend Hillary Moore, you can go to the Gay with God show page at empoweredmidge.podbean.com, and you will find that link there where you can look at the work that she's doing. And if you are questioning whether you can be gay and be in a relationship with the God of your understanding, if you identify as as LGBTQIA, God has always been within you, even when you didn't know it. You have always been gay with God. Thank you, everybody. See you next week. Stay tuned to hear how you can join the Gay with God community, and check out the Facebook group Gay with God that is on Facebook, and it's a monthly journey of your faith. How are we doing, and what questions do we still have? And so we would welcome you to join that group. And if you are needing support through your coming out faith journey story, go to the show page at empoweredmidge.podbean.com, scroll all the way to the bottom, and see how you can connect with me, and I'd be glad to serve you. Guys, have a wonderful day. Love you. See you next week. I want to invite you to become a part of the Gay with God community. How can you do that? Stay connected by messaging me your thoughts and comments in the comment section under the downloads of the show on the Gay with God show page. Subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen, and share so we can increase our community outreach and be a light to those who are struggling to claim their faith. Consider being a sponsor so I can highlight your service in our community. We are all worthy of respect and a relationship with the God of our understanding. I want to thank you in advance for supporting this podcast. Together, we as a community will keep this show visible and our community stronger. Deep gratitude to my friend Tim McClendon of Tim McClendon Music for allowing me to use an excerpt from Interlude 4, a song found on his CD entitled Sundance.